Okay, boys, so I want you to go to page 405 of your textbook. And on page 405, you will see this little section called Just for the Record. It says break even point. So I want you to copy this whole question down, and then we're going to talk about how this is done. So you pause this video just so you can get the question copied down first, the whole thing, this whole bit, and then I want you to stop and then you can watch what I'm doing on the board. Okay, so I'm back. Make sure you got that copied down first. So the reason I'm doing this is an extension that we're doing here, so if some of you don't quite get it, don't panic. All right, but it's just for the record, it's a break-even point, which is an application of simultaneous equations. So if any of you are thinking of doing economics or commerce or business at uni, you will be dealing with break-even points at some point. Some of you might be thinking of doing economics or business studies in year 11 and 12. If you're thinking of doing economics, you will be doing graphs like we've got with two equations in that course. Not too many people do economics these days. I think in statewide it's about 5,000. Business studies has a lot more. But have a look at both courses and see if you are interested, because a lot of boys do go on to university and do these courses. Okay, so at some point you'll go and be talking about these concepts. Total revenue, it says in what you copied down from page 404, the total revenue is the cost per item times the number of items made. If you look at the question they've given you on page 405, we're talking about books being sold. So I've changed cost to price because it's really the price that it's being sold to the public for. So it's price per item times the number of items sold when we're talking about books. Okay, so revenue, I'm just going to use R for revenue. The number of items sold we're going to use as N. So the price per item, if you read it, the books are sold for $35. So that's the price per item. So our revenue, our total revenue, is going to be $35 for each book sold. So it's going to be $35 times N. Revenue just means the amount of money coming in. Okay, so people will often, in their bank statements, when they're doing their books for a business, they'll talk about what our revenue was last year. That's not how much money they make. That's just how much money they bring in. Okay, so if you sell a book for $35 and you sell 2 books, you bring in $70. That's your revenue. Okay, so over here, the total costs, if you read what it said on page 405, the total cost formula is the fixed costs plus the variable costs. So fixed costs are things like rent. Okay, most businesses do not own their premises. So in these days of coronavirus, you're going to see a lot of businesses struggle, and even the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has spoken about this, that they're having a moratorium on rents not being paid. Because a business is not bringing in any revenue, they're not going to be able to pay their rent. Okay, so you can walk down in Caringbah and you'll see a business that's shut. There might be a jeweller shop that's shut. There might be a massage therapist that's shut. They're not allowed to run their business at the moment. They still have to pay rent. So a rent is a fixed cost. That money must go out every month. All right, so things like that are fixed costs. You might have a business where you hire some of your equipment. So some of the gyms may not own their equipment, they might hire them. So all those things in their gym that they're paying the hire of, they're fixed, okay? Because they're not going to go, oh, well, we'll just get rid of 5 treadmills this week. They're there for good, they're fixed costs. The variable costs are things that will vary depending on the number of things that are happening. So in this case, because we're dealing with books, the number of books being sold and what happens there, that's a variable cost. Okay, so our total cost, we're going to use C for costs, And we've got a fixed cost, if you read the question, of $110,000. A lot of money that's being paid out all the time, no matter what happens with their business. Plus, they're adding on their variable costs. Now, in this case, we're talking about the number of books. So we're our N back here. N is the number of items sold, but in this case, it's the number of books sold. So the number of books has a variable cost of $8.50 per book. So that varies on however many books you are producing. Okay, so that's the equation for our total costs. So if we just simplify it a little bit without the dollar signs and things, we've got C equals 110,000 plus 8.5 N. All right, so if we look at our two equations, we have an equation for revenue, R equals 35N, and we have an equation for costs, C equals 110,000 plus 8.50N. If we were to graph this, which is what the question is actually asking in the book, we are going to end up with a y-intercept of 110,000. I don't feel like doing that graph. So we're going to do this the way we do know how to do this with simultaneous equations and see what answer we get. Okay, so the break-even point is crucial to any business. A break-even point occurs when your total revenue equals your total costs. So the money you're bringing into a business and the money you're paying out of the business, if they equal each other, you're sitting there earning nothing, but at least your revenue will pay for your costs. So that's where you break even. It's really important in business. So if we have a look here, if our revenue has to equal our costs, that means R has to equal C. So if these two things are equal to each other, you can think of them like Y if you like. It's like having a Y there, and the N's are sitting over here like X's. So if they're equal, we can get this equation and make it equal to this equation. So that's what I've done. So if you get your N's together on one side and collect your like terms, you're going to have 26.50 N equals 110,000. Solve your equation for N and you're going to get 4,150.943396 items made, or in this case, books made and sold. Okay, so the question says how many books have to be produced to make a profit, to start making a profit? Well, we're going to just round off to the nearest whole number. So that's a 9, this is going to go up to 1. So we start making a profit when we can make and sell 4,151 books. Up until that point, you're making a loss. So if we have a look at what it looks like, we didn't graph this because I wasn't doing a y-intercept of 110,000, but let's have a look at it. The equation R equals 35N. Think of it as y equals 35x. If you found the y-intercept and x-intercept, they would coincide here. If you find an extra point, letting x equal 1, you'll get 135. I've just put it close down here because the numbers are so big elsewhere. And we draw through, that's something like what the graph would look like. The other one, C equals 110,000 plus 850N, we would have a y-intercept of 110,000. And we're going to have a positive gradient. Okay, so just think of it as like y equals 110,000 plus 850x. Okay, it's just like that. So this is your gradient. If we put it in y equals mx plus b form, mx plus c form, sorry, that's your gradient and that's your y-intercept there. Okay, so we have a positive gradient and we have a y-intercept of 110,000. So we know it's going to go through here and have a positive gradient, so it'll keep rising. So our break-even point, just turn this around a little bit. Okay, the break-even point is right here, where the two lines cross. That's where your total revenue will equal your total costs. Okay, so here it is here. We know that that's going to happen just from what we worked out down here, when N is approximately 4,151. And I don't know what the revenue is. They didn't ask us for that in the question, but you could find it. You could just sub it into the easier of the two equations, put your N value in, and it actually works out that the revenue for this business is $145,285. Now, a lot of people look at that and go, that's heaps of money. Look at all the money they're getting. But they're not getting that money. That's the revenue they're bringing in, and then they have to pay their costs and all the money goes back out again. So they're not making much profit at all at that point. It's less than one book that they're making profit on. Okay, so before that, what actually happens if you look at it, remember the blue line is the revenue line and the red line is the cost line. So see how the cost line is above the revenue line. That means our costs are a lot higher than our revenue. They're still higher than our revenue. They're still higher than our revenue. Costs are still higher than our revenue, all the way up to there. They finally equal each other. Then, as you go past that, the blue line is above the red line. So the blue line is the revenue line. So now your revenue is bigger than your costs. It's higher than your costs. That means you'll be making a profit. So this is the only section up here where you start to make a profit is made. Okay? Only when the revenue graph is higher than the cost graph. So I'm going to put a few links on, just probably 2 links for you to have a look at. One, an article about this, and another one, a little YouTube clip. The YouTube clip's got nothing to do with the maths, it's just more interest for what they advise for small businesses, because in the first 5 years of any business, there's a 50% chance of failure. So if any of you ever decide to go into business, especially if there are a lot of costs involved, when you start hiring premises and paying rent, you have to really think carefully about it. So the little clip I'm going to put on is some advice from some very successful business owners, and they can tell you what they advise about it. But yes, a 50% failure in the first 5 years. And with this coronavirus, with a lot of businesses that are going to go under, that's why the government's trying to help them out. So something for you to think about.